Hey everyone, welcome back to Business Book Breakdowns. If you're liking what you're hearing on this deep dive, make sure to like and subscribe so you don't miss out on future breakdowns. Today we're diving into Superconnector. And this book, well, it kind of throws that whole old school networking thing right out the window. The whole business card frenzy. Yeah, get ready to rethink how you build those relationships because Superconnector says it's not about how many people you know, but who you know and the quality of those connections.
It really is interesting how Superconnector challenges that whole transactional networking idea, like all those LinkedIn requests, and the awkward small talk at conferences. Are those connections really getting you anywhere? The book argues that building those relationships, what they call social capital, is way more valuable.
Okay, so let's unpack this whole social capital thing. What does that even mean, and how do we actually build it?
It's like, think of social capital as the currency of relationships.
Mhm.
And like any currency, it's about the quality, not just the quantity you have. Superconnector argues that building this valuable social capital starts with you, with self-awareness.
So it's not as simple as just slapping on a name tag and hoping for the best.
No, not at all. It's about really understanding your strengths, weaknesses, even how other people see you. This self-awareness, it helps you interact more authentically and find your pond, that community where your skills really resonate.
Finding your people, right. Okay, that makes sense. But what's next? How do you make sure those interactions become something meaningful, something more?
Well, that's where your thesis comes in, knowing what you stand for, the unique value you bring to the table. Think about the authors, Scott and Ryan. They created the Young Entrepreneur Council, YEC, all based on their passion for supporting young entrepreneurs.
So it's like having a personal mission statement, but for your networking.
I like it.
Now, they also talk about the importance of anchors. What's the significance of having those in your network?
Think of anchors as those pillars, the ones who really get your mission from the get-go. They champion you. Remember those early YEC events Scott and Ryan talked about? The ones that were a little awkward at first?
Oh, yeah, they've definitely learned a thing or two about event planning along the way.
Exactly. But those early events were successful because of those anchors, those first few entrepreneurs who really bought into their vision. They're the foundation for building that strong community.
Okay, so you've found your pond, you've defined your thesis, and you've got your anchors. What's next in this Superconnector playbook?
Time to create remarkable experiences. And no, I'm not just talking about throwing a good party, although, that can be part of it.
All right, spill the tea. What actually makes an experience remarkable in the Superconnector world?
Remember those kind of awkward YEC lunches we talked about? Well, Scott and Ryan, they realized just gathering people in a room wasn't enough. They learned to create experiences that really fostered genuine connection. They were intentional about every detail, from the guest list and seating chart to the overall vibe, creating an environment where those serendipitous moments could happen.
So it's about crafting an experience people actually want to be a part of, right?
Right.
Something that sparks conversations, leaves a good impression. Like those exclusive events they eventually started hosting at a ski resort.
Exactly. And this is where I think the book gets really interesting because they talk about technology, not replacing connections, but enhancing them. It's all about using your online presence intentionally.
Which is key, especially now, right?
Yeah.
Our online presence is often the first impression.
Exactly. Superconnector talks about Google-proofing yourself. One of the authors even shares a story about finding negative reviews of YEC on Reddit and how he carefully responded to minimize the damage.
Wow. So even superconnectors have to deal with negative online reviews. It just goes to show how important it is to manage your online reputation. But I like that they emphasize being genuine above all else.
Absolutely. Because at the end of the day, people want to connect with people. Superconnector reminds us that building a genuine community, whether online or offline, should be the goal. But to build that community, sometimes you have to master the art of the ask. And let's be honest, that can be kind of awkward.
It's true. Asking for what you need can feel, I don't know, kind of uncomfortable. How does Superconnector say we navigate that, without becoming that person everyone tries to avoid at a networking event?
Well, they actually break it down pretty well. They really emphasize being specific, offering value up front, having realistic expectations, and being mindful of who you're asking.
So instead of that vague, can you help me with my business? It's more like, hey, I'm trying to connect with someone who understands X market. And given your experience with Y, I thought maybe we could swap some insights.
Exactly. Show them you've done your homework. You're not just looking for a handout. Superconnector actually gives some good examples of strong versus weak asks that I found pretty helpful.
Right. It's like they give you the actual words to use in those conversations. Speaking of which, they also talk about building a referral network. Makes sense if you're already putting in the work to build those relationships.
Totally. And what's really interesting is that Superconnector suggests those referrals should happen naturally. Like, it's not about explicitly asking, but creating a space where they just kind of occur
Yeah.
because of the value you bring, the trust you build.
So less about saying, hey, refer me to everyone you know, and more about becoming that go-to person people want to recommend because you deliver.
Exactly. Think about it. When you're known for providing value, building those solid relationships, well, people are drawn to that. The book gives examples of how superconnectors do that, how they create these environments where referrals just naturally happen.
Like those customer appreciation events they talked about, or even just consistently making introductions within their own network.
Right. It all goes back to that social capital idea. The more you invest in those real, genuine relationships, the more valuable your network becomes. And then the more others are inclined to contribute to it. It's a cycle.
But it's not about just letting anyone in, right?
Right.
There's got to be a balance between being a connector and, well, being a pushover.
Yeah, you're right. And the book talks about that too. It's about being choosy, making sure the people you're connecting with, they share your values, they add something positive to the mix. They even talk about using your anchors, those trusted advisors, to kind of help you vet connections, make sure you're building something that lifts everyone up.
So surround yourself with people who challenge you, inspire you, people who are also committed to building something worthwhile.
You got it. And they actually go a step further, suggesting you set up guidelines for your network, almost like I don't know, a code of conduct. It keeps your community strong, make sure everyone's on the same page.
Which reminds me of the different types of connectors Superconnector talks about. You know, the thinkers, the enablers, the executors. They say that while all superconnectors share certain traits, they also have their own style, their own strengths.
Oh, absolutely. And understanding your connector type, it helps you play to your strengths, build a network that really fits you. Like thinkers, they excel at connecting ideas that might seem totally random. Enablers are all about collaboration, creating that supportive environment. And executors, they make things happen, turning those ideas into reality.
I like that it acknowledges that there's not just one right way to be a superconnector. It's about finding what works for you, what makes you valuable. And I love that they talk about introverts as powerful connectors, too. You don't have to be the loudest person in the room, do you?
Right. That was one of my favorite parts, too. They point out that introverts are often amazing at reading people, and they excel at building those one-on-one connections, which, let's be real, those are super valuable.
Totally. But even though building a thriving network takes effort, it seems like it could get overwhelming quickly if you're not careful. What's Superconnector have to say about managing your time and energy while building your network?
You know, they actually address that head on. A big theme in Superconnector is about setting boundaries, learning to say no, protecting your time so you can recharge and not burn out.
So it's about that balance between being available and spreading yourself too thin. Making time for your own well-being while still nurturing those important connections.
Exactly. And they even give some tips on how to do it, like using technology to your advantage, to organize your network, streamline your communication, even schedule dedicated time for those relationship building activities. It's like blocking out time for a workout, but for your connections.
This conversation is making me realize Superconnector isn't just a book about networking, is it? It's about building a life where relationships are at the center.
Totally. It's about moving away from those shallow interactions and building a community that really fuels you. And one of the most impactful takeaways for me was the emphasis on playing the long game.
So you're saying it's not about those quick wins, those fleeting LinkedIn connections. It's about something, I don't know, deeper.
Exactly. It's about those long-term investments, It's less about playing the stock market and more like tending a garden. You nurture those relationships over time. You water them. You let them grow.
And I bet you anything to harvest is so much better when you do, right?
100%. Superconnector really drives home this point. A network's true value is in those deep quality connections, not just how many contacts you rack up.
It's like a mindset shift almost, going from what can this person do for me to how can I add value to this relationship?
Yeah, that's it. It's about approaching relationships with, I don't know, generosity, real curiosity. wanting to connect with someone on a human level. And, we live in this world that feels more automated and impersonal all the time, but Superconnector reminds us of how powerful those human connections really are. And the people who can build and nurture those bonds, well, they've got a serious advantage.
So superconnectors, they're like the antidote to this whole digital age.
I like that. It's about holding on to our humanity. Bringing authenticity to a world that often feels fake and superficial. And they're not saying ditch technology altogether. Remember, they talk about using tools to actually enhance those relationships. It's about being intentional with it rather than letting it isolate us.
This deep dive has honestly been eye-opening. I feel like I have this whole new way of looking at relationships now.
Me too. Superconnector is one of those books that sticks with you. One of the biggest takeaways for me was this idea of community building. It's going beyond just connecting one person to another, but creating this whole ecosystem, a place where people can support each other, share ideas, and do more together than they ever could alone.
So it's like thinking beyond just your own network and looking at how you fit into the bigger picture, like in your industry, your community, even the world.
Exactly. They argue that a lot of superconnectors, they're driven by making a real impact. They use their networks to create something bigger than themselves.
That's pretty inspiring. It's not just about climbing the ladder, but using your connections to make a positive difference. And that all starts with those meaningful relationships.
And remember, building those relationships takes time. It takes putting yourself out there, being open to learning and growing along the way. It's not always easy, but Superconnector makes a really strong case for why it matters.
Well, that wraps up our deep dive into Superconnector. If all this sounds interesting and you're ready to learn more, we'll have a link to the book down in the show notes. And hey, if you enjoyed this breakdown, don't forget to hit that like button, leave a comment, and subscribe to the channel for more deep dives. Until next time, happy connecting.